Florence never ruled an empire. Its streets never echoed with the marching rhythm of hundreds of thousands of imperial soldiers. It possessed no vast territory stretching across continents. No emperor sat upon a golden throne commanding Europe. Yet for more than a century, kings borrowed its money. Popes trusted its books. Republics feared its influence. And across Europe, decisions affecting millions of people quietly passed through the hands of one family. Not because they owned the most gold, but because they controlled something far more valuable, an invisible throne. History usually remembers the Medici as unimaginably wealthy bankers who became patrons of Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Botticelli. That story is true, but incomplete. Their greatest achievement was not accumulating fortunes. It was discovering that whoever controls the movement of money eventually shapes the movement of power. Before we uncover how they built that invisible throne, consider one remarkable fact. By the late 15th century, the Medici Bank managed financial operations for the papacy itself. The institution responsible for collecting revenues from churches across Europe depended on the accounting system of a private banking family from Florence. No conquest had made this possible. No army had enforced it. Only trust. And that single word is the first clue to understanding why the Medici changed Europe forever. The invisible throne did not appear overnight. It grew slowly, almost unnoticed, inside a financial revolution that most people living through it never fully recognized. To understand why their system became so powerful, we have to step back into a Europe that was becoming richer, more connected, and far more dangerous for anyone trying to move money.
14th century Europe was changing faster than its financial system could follow. Trade expanded across the Mediterranean. Flemish cloth reached Italian ports. English wool financed continental commerce. Venetian merchants crossed seas carrying spices, silk, and precious metals from distant markets. Every successful voyage created new fortunes and new risks. Moving wealth remained painfully primitive. Gold and silver had weight. They attracted thieves, pirates, corrupt officials, and opportunistic rulers. A merchant traveling from Florence to Bruges might spend months transporting coins while worrying that one robbery, one storm, or one unexpected tax could erase years of work. Commerce demanded something safer than wagons filled with treasure. Europe needed institutions capable of moving value without physically moving gold. Earlier merchant families had experimented with bills of exchange, partnerships, and rudimentary banking.
But these practices remained fragmented, local, and often unreliable. Information traveled slowly. Records differed from city to city. Trust rarely extended beyond familiar communities. The challenge was not simply protecting wealth. It was convincing strangers hundreds of miles away that invisible promises written on paper could be treated as confidently as piles of silver sitting inside a vault. Most people saw this merely as an accounting problem. The Medici would recognize it as a problem of power, because anyone capable of becoming the trusted intermediary between thousands of merchants would eventually find government standing in the same line as everyone else. That was the world Giovanni de' Medici inherited, and unlike many wealthy merchants of his generation, he understood that money itself was never the most valuable asset inside a bank. Relationships were.
Giovanni de' Medici did not begin with an empire. He began with patience. Born in Florence during the late 14th century, he entered a world where established banking families already competed fiercely for influence. Success demanded more than wealth. It required a reputation so dependable that clients would trust your promises even when they had never met you. Giovanni built exactly that reputation. Rather than chasing spectacular profits through dangerous speculation,
He emphasized careful lending, disciplined bookkeeping, and long-term relationships. Merchants returned because transactions were predictable. Clergy returned because accounts remained accurate. Noble families returned because reliability gradually became more valuable than aggressive expansion. Florence itself offered the perfect environment for this strategy. Unlike kingdoms dominated by hereditary monarchs, Florence functioned as a republic where commercial success translated directly into political influence. Banking families interacted daily with textile producers, merchants, guild leaders, diplomats, and church officials. Information flowed through conversations as much as contracts. Every customer brought more than deposits. They brought news: who needed financing, which ruler faced debt, which harvest had failed, which city anticipated war, which merchant fleet had safely arrived. A successful banker collected information almost accidentally. Giovanni realized these fragments possessed extraordinary value long before Europe considered information an economic resource. Every transaction expanded not only his balance sheet, but also his understanding of how Europe's commercial arteries actually functioned. His son, Cosimo de' Medici, would inherit far more than money. He would inherit the beginnings of an information network stretching quietly across the continent. Most rivals still believed banking was about protecting wealth. The Medici were beginning to understand that wealth merely financed something much larger.
Correspondence from the Bruges branch.
The machinery that transformed this family into Europe's financial powerhouse looked surprisingly ordinary. Ledgers, letters, branches, bookkeepers. Nothing about these tools suggested they would eventually reshape political history. The Medici expanded methodically, establishing branches in Florence, Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, London, and other commercial centers. Each office appeared independent enough to adapt to local conditions, while remaining connected through standardized accounting and constant correspondence. For clients, this meant remarkable convenience. A merchant depositing money in Florence could receive payment in Bruges without transporting chests of coins across mountains and pirate-infested seas. Paper replaced caravans. Trust replaced armed escorts. Behind this seemingly simple service lay one of history's most sophisticated communication systems. Letters flowed continuously between branches carrying exchange rates, commodity prices, political developments, credit conditions, shipping news, and customer behavior. Weeks before governments fully understood changing conditions, the Medici network often possessed a remarkably accurate picture of Europe's economic pulse. This informational advantage compounded every year. Then came the relationship that elevated the family beyond ordinary bankers: the papacy. Managing papal finances meant collecting revenues from dioceses scattered across Europe, transferring funds internationally, converting currencies, financing construction, and coordinating enormous financial flows, requiring absolute confidence. The Medici did not merely earn commissions, they became indispensable. Every successful transaction deepened dependence. Every new branch strengthened communication. Every reliable ledger reinforced trust. To outsiders, the family appeared to be accumulating wealth. But beneath the polished accounting books, another architecture was quietly taking shape. An architecture where information moved faster than armies, where credit reached farther than royal decrees, and where the institution connecting every transaction gradually acquired something kings themselves could never purchase. The invisible throne had begun to emerge. The remarkable part is that almost nobody recognized it, not even many of the people helping to build it. The next stage would reveal why money itself was becoming secondary. Because once information began moving faster than gold, Europe would never operate the same way again.
Gold still mattered. But by the middle of the 15th century, another commodity had quietly become even more valuable. Knowing where gold would move next, every letter arriving at a Medici branch carried far more than balances and signatures. It revealed whether English wool exports were slowing, whether a ruler needed emergency financing, whether a poor harvest would raise grain prices, or whether a war threatened a major trade route. Individually, these details seemed ordinary. Together, they formed something unprecedented, a continent-wide picture of Europe's economy before any government could assemble one. The Medici were not inventing information. They were inventing the system that connected it. Each office strengthened every other office. A merchant in Bruges unknowingly improved decisions in Rome. A bishop's payment in Avignon helped predict liquidity in Florence. News from London influenced exchange rates before many competitors even knew events had occurred.
The network became smarter with every transaction. This is one of history's earliest examples of what economists today call a network effect. The value of the system did not grow in direct proportion to its size. It grew exponentially because every new participant increased the usefulness of the entire network. That made leaving the network increasingly difficult. Merchants trusted Medici letters because everyone else trusted them. Rulers borrowed because the family could move funds across borders faster than their rivals. Church officials relied on Medici accountants because the records were already accepted across Europe. Trust began reinforcing itself. Money was no longer just wealth stored inside vaults. It had become information flowing through relationships. The invisible throne was becoming stronger, but it still rested on something remarkably fragile: confidence. Lose confidence, and the entire structure would tremble.
For now, however, confidence was expanding faster than anyone imagined possible. And that confidence opened a door that no medieval king had fully understood.
The agreements are sealed. We accept the conditions.
Military conquest was expensive. Influence, surprisingly, could be much cheaper. When rulers needed armies, they required financing before they could collect taxes. When wars interrupted trade, merchants needed credit before ships sailed again. When cathedrals expanded or governments faced unexpected shortages, someone had to provide liquidity immediately, not months later. Increasingly, that someone was the Medici. The family rarely dictated policy through direct commands. They rarely needed to. A ruler deeply dependent on future loans naturally listened more carefully to the institution capable of approving or delaying them. Influence accumulated quietly. One successful loan created another relationship. One relationship created access. Access created information. Information improved lending decisions. Better lending strengthened reputation. The cycle reinforced itself. Unlike traditional aristocrats, whose authority depended upon inherited land or military force, the Medici built influence through repeated cooperation. Their clients returned voluntarily because the system worked. Every repayment increased credibility. Every accurate ledger strengthened confidence. Every fulfilled promise expanded the family's invisible reach. This distinction mattered enormously. Armies occupy territory, banks occupy expectations. Long before modern central banks existed, the Medici understood that shaping expectations often produced greater stability than threatening violence. Merchants planned voyages because they trusted future payments. Governments negotiated because they trusted future credit. Church officials organized finances because they trusted future settlements. The family became less like a vault, more like the operating system beneath European commerce. Yet beneath this extraordinary success, another pattern was quietly emerging, one that still defines the world's most powerful financial institutions. By the middle of the story, the Medici were influencing decisions long before official meetings ever began.
but the mechanism behind that influence remained hidden. The invisible throne still had one final secret.
As wealth accumulated, the family's ambitions naturally expanded beyond banking. Money purchased opportunities that could not appear on a balance sheet. Cosimo de' Medici understood that political authority did not begin inside government buildings. It began inside networks of obligation. The family financed public works, supported monasteries, sponsored scholars, commissioned architects, collected manuscripts, funded artists whose names would later define the Renaissance itself. To many contemporaries, these acts appeared to be generosity. They were. But they were also strategic investments in legitimacy. Every magnificent church strengthened relationships with religious leaders. Every public building associated the Medici name with prosperity rather than mere profit. Every artist whose career flourished under Medici patronage enhanced the family's reputation throughout Italy. Soft power expanded where financial power already existed. Florence gradually became inseparable from the Medici themselves. Visitors admired artistic brilliance, while rarely noticing the accounting system quietly financing much of it. This blending of finance, culture, politics, and diplomacy produced something unique. The family no longer operated inside separate worlds. They connected them. A merchant seeking credit might encounter diplomats. A bishop arranging transfers might meet influential scholars. Foreign ambassadors frequently observed that understanding Florence increasingly meant understanding the Medici. The bank had become the center of an ecosystem. But ecosystems create dependencies, and dependencies create vulnerabilities. The larger the network grew, the more difficult it became to isolate problems. One distant default could ripple through branches hundreds of miles away. One political crisis could suddenly become everyone's crisis. The seeds of future weakness were already present. The irony was unmistakable. The very connections making the Medici indispensable would eventually make them dangerously exposed. The invisible throne had never looked stronger. It had also never been more fragile. History often describes great financial collapses as sudden. Reality is usually slower. Risks accumulate quietly, while success convinces everyone that the system has become permanent. The Medici Bank was no exception. Its international network depended on trustworthy rulers honoring debts, stable exchange rates, profitable trade routes, disciplined local managers, and continuous confidence among clients. Remove enough of these foundations, and even the strongest institution would begin to weaken. Some branches outperformed expectations, others struggled. Political lending carried dangers commercial lending rarely did. Kings could delay repayment for years. Princes occasionally negotiated from positions of power rather than obligation. A merchant declaring bankruptcy was unfortunate. A sovereign default threatened entire banking houses. At the same time, managing an expanding multinational organization proved increasingly difficult. Communication remained remarkable for the 15th century, yet messages still required weeks to cross Europe. Local managers exercised significant discretion. Oversight became more complicated as the network expanded. Success introduced complexity. Complexity introduced blind spots. Most observers still believe the Medici dominated Europe simply because they possessed enormous wealth. That explanation felt satisfying. It was also incomplete, because wealth alone cannot explain why rulers listened before decisions were made. It cannot explain why institutions trusted invisible promises more than visible treasure. It cannot explain why one banking family reshaped European politics without commanding a continental army. The answer has been hiding in plain sight since the opening moments of this story. And in the next section,
The invisible throne
a
will
structure built
finally
not of
be
stone,
revealed.
but of gold and debt, the true foundation of power.
Most histories ask the wrong question. They ask how the Medici became so rich. The more important question is why so many powerful people willingly allowed a private family to shape their decisions. The answer was never hidden inside a vault. It lived inside the network. This is the invisible throne. The Medici's greatest invention was not a new coin, a revolutionary contract, or even a larger bank. Bills of exchange already existed. Merchant partnerships already existed. Bookkeeping itself was evolving across Italy. None of those innovations alone explain why one family rose above every rival. What the Medici perfected was something far more powerful. They transformed financial dependency into political authority. Every ruler who required credit became more predictable. Every bishop moving church revenues became another source of information. Every merchant financing long-distance trade revealed prices, shortages, opportunities, and risks before they appeared in public markets. Every successful transaction strengthened the credibility of every future transaction. Eventually, the bank no longer simply reacted to Europe's economy, it anticipated it. When a king prepared for war, the network often knew before neighboring rulers. When harvests failed, the letters arriving from multiple branches revealed the pattern before local governments fully understood the scale. When currencies weakened, exchange data flowing across Europe exposed pressures invisible to isolated city-states. This informational advantage created something no crown could purchase: the ability to influence decisions before those decisions were formally made. A prince deciding whether to wage war needed financing. A pope funding a campaign needed transfers. A republic balancing public accounts needed confidence from merchants. The Medici rarely needed to issue commands. Their position inside Europe's financial bloodstream quietly shaped the choices available to everyone else. That was the invisible throne. Power without conquest. Authority without a crown. Control without direct rule. The family did not replace governments. They became increasingly difficult for governments to function without. And that distinction would echo through history long after the Medici Bank itself disappeared. Yet, even invisible thrones are not immortal. The same interconnected network that created extraordinary influence also concentrated extraordinary risk. Royal borrowers did not always repay their debts. Political alliances shifted. Competition intensified as other banking houses learned from Medici methods. Internal management became more difficult across a growing international organization. Some historians point to the defaults of powerful rulers, particularly the financial difficulties surrounding branches such as Bruges and London. Others emphasize declining managerial discipline after the family's most capable leaders passed away. The truth is likely a combination of pressures rather than a single, dramatic collapse. Networks fail differently from kingdoms. Empires often collapse when armies lose battles. Financial systems weaken when confidence slowly disappears. Clients withdraw. Credit tightens. Profits shrink. Trust erodes one decision at a time. By the close of the 15th century, the Medici Bank no longer occupied the commanding position it once held within European commerce. Ironically, the family's political influence continued long after its banking dominance faded. Medici descendants became Grand Dukes of Tuscany, and two members of the family, Leo X and Clement VII, rose to the papacy. The bank declined. The dynasty endured. Its financial machine proved temporary. Its political legacy proved far more durable. The invisible throne had changed form, but it had not vanished. 5 centuries later, the architecture feels strangely familiar. The names have changed, the technology has changed, the speed has changed. The underlying logic has not. Today's largest financial institutions process information across continents in milliseconds rather than weeks. Capital crosses oceans with electronic instructions instead of handwritten letters. Governments monitor markets continuously instead of waiting for riders carrying sealed correspondence. Yet the central lesson remains remarkably similar. Information moves before money. Confidence moves before information. Power follows confidence. The organizations sitting closest to those flows often possess influence that cannot be measured simply by their balance sheets. This does not mean modern banks secretly rule governments. History is rarely that simple. But it does suggest that institutions connecting finance, information, and trust occupy positions of influence that extend beyond the assets they directly own. The Medici demonstrated this centuries before economists developed language to describe network effects, informational advantages, or institutional credibility. They discovered that controlling transactions was only the beginning. The real prize was becoming indispensable. Once enough people depended upon your system, your influence no longer required force. It became embedded in the expectations of everyone using it. That is the real inheritance of Florence. Not magnificent palaces, not priceless paintings, not even one of history's greatest banking fortunes, but a new understanding of where power actually